Yeah, we're live. All right, people. Thanks for being here. For those of you who wanted to pop in and catch our recording of the next episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast, we're glad you're here. And if you're watching this after the fact, well, maybe next time you can catch it live. That would be cool. But let's get going. 5, 4, 3.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today on episode 211 of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast?
We don't often talk about what happens after a major cyber incident. I was looking in our back catalog. Yeah, we kind of talk about it every now and then. But this is what we're going to do today. And we're not going to talk about the technical aspects, right? Although clearly there's a lot we could unpack there. What we're going to talk about is the executive decisions. And how should senior leaders think about cyber investment once they've been through a serious cyber incident? And as folks can see who are watching this, we have a guest. This is Stephanie Warren. She's the Assistant Director of Information Security at the Port of Seattle. Now, she's going to bring a very rare and valuable perspective to us on this topic because she lived through a major incident at Sea-Tac Airport, which is one of the ports that Seattle has, right? We actually also have a shipping port, right, where we can unload those 40-foot containers. Yeah, we've got that too. But we're talking about the airport. Now, that's critical infrastructure. And she went through a major event there, and it was extremely public. And she's going to share what she learned about that event. So I'm excited. Yeah.
So Stephanie, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you just start before we really, get into the excitement? Just tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to this work.
Well, so I've been at the port over 20 years. Started as a contractor. I got into this work because my original job, printer building, went to Mexico and NAFTA said, we'll pay for your schooling. Well, I couldn't decide what to do. And I just happened chance sat next to someone in the unemployment office who said, oh, are you going to do that new computer program at Everett Community College? And I said, yeah, of course. That's what everyone's doing. So of course, that's what I'm going to do.
The cool kids are there. I'm going to go.
Exactly. It was close to home. I could walk there. We didn't have any money at the time, so it was a great pick. But I really quickly identified that I had found my home. All of a sudden, reason and logic and this problem-solving component of me was highlighted and appreciated. So, but at the port, I've done everything from started doing upgrades way back when it was NT to service desk to hardware repair to, figuring out what our desktop situation is going to look like and then into information security. So it's been a many years, the last couple of years longer than the previous, but I've come out of it definitely a better cybersecurity person and definitely a better leader because of it.
You're an OG. You've been doing this for quite some time.
Well, and I think too that I think that gives you a perspective that many people in security don't have these days because they didn't come up through the ranks. I mean, you're very much the epitome of, the future executive who started sweeping the floors, right? And
agreed.
Those people have incredible experience and oftentimes are some of the most successful. And I think, now we have cybersecurity degrees, and it's like, okay, but have you lost something by skipping over all of that kind of foundational work and just going right to security? I don't know. It is what it is, but I think it's fascinating.
I don't know if they've lost something, but it definitely, we need those people more now than we ever did before.
Yep.
We need more of the OGs. And so we need a less straight path to security than what we're getting. Now that, I remember when I said I was going into security, my mom said, "Oh, I heard that's the new black." And I thought, well, that's great because that's generally all I wear. So this all fit right in one. Now everyone wants in on it, but they fast track to it, which there's a huge part of that. We need that. But there's something to be said for being able to talk to the network engineer, the system engineer, the server engineer, now the cloud engineers. Being able to have those conversations at an in-depth level is mission critical. So I feel that's one of my I feel very passionate about. So
Jake got you right on your soapbox right out of the gate.
I did. It's well done.
We knew it was going to happen. I was going to find a box at some point. So
well, we have many actually. We're going to put you on or try to entice you to get on.
Excellent.
And let's get into it, right? So let's get in the Wayback Machine. It's August 2024, which is about 2 years ago. By the time this episode is published, it'll be nearly 2 years. And the Port of Seattle gets hit with a ransomware attack. So this is national news. Baggage systems offline, flight displays, right? As a passenger, when I go into the terminal, I'm looking at those giant boards, and they're dark. There's no website to look at. I can't use Wi-Fi in the terminal, right? This is what we're seeing from the outside. But Stephanie, I want you to walk us through what it was like from the inside. And again, not the ones and zeros, but what it felt like when everything shifted from normal operations into a crisis mode that you were operating in.
So I do want to, you did mention before, the airport. This did impact our seaport operations, our maritime operations too. However, all eyes are on the airport because it's such a visible, critical infrastructure. But then you also had all the people that it takes to run the port as an organization. So what we call all the people in central services downtown, which them not being able to work saved our bacon. The port has a history of volunteering. And so we had people immediately, they got up, saw what was happening and headed to the airport to put on their vest with their whiteboards, their own markers to hold signs, usher passengers, stand at doors, all of those things. So,
okay, wait a minute. So for people who are not familiar with the geography of Sea-Tac Airport in the Seattle area, I just wanted to clarify something. You're telling me that there were people working in downtown Seattle and they got into cars, trains, whatever, and they went out to the airport, which is about maybe a 30-minute travel time, right? So it's not just around the corner. And then all of a sudden they were in there saying, what can I do, right?
They do it when the weather is chaotic. They do it when we have massive flight delays and they know things are going to back up. Their port staff are a little bit of a different breed. I have a new guy right now, and he said the volunteer culture here runs strong. And it really does. Of course, I'm amused because when I sat at the airport all day, I'm mostly remote now. I had my own vest. I had my own hard hat. I had my own whiteboard. Those are things that, again, I think partly OGs have because we've been there. We know how it backs up. But again, very lucky. We had hundreds of people, lucky, unlucky. We had hundreds of people downtown that headed to the airport to help. But when you talk about what that looked like, to be honest, it was very surreal because all of a sudden, and very affirming for some of us who had said, we do all these tabletops. Don't look at the cyber incident. We're going to handle that. The technology, we're going to handle that. If we have a cyber incident, though, it's an operational nightmare. We are handwriting bag tags. We are handwriting boarding passes because we have these common use systems that are no longer working. Like you said, no cameras. I mean, how many times I personally look at my C app 5, 6, 7 times throughout my trip through the airport. Where am I going to eat? How long is the wait line? What's my baggage? Check in, all of those things. So you have none of those things. So we do have the airport that's very adept at standing up operations, incident command, all those things easily. We're not very skilled or practiced at setting up a unified command when there's a cyber. So there was a big disconnect at first. So a little pandemonium, but the first thing that becomes problematic is communication. we didn't have we had our cell phones, but cell phone service at the airport was inundated. Workers couldn't get on their laptops. Very few of us had that ability to get on our laptops. I will say the operational stand up was instantaneous. Like they're a skilled group. That the airport operations is next level in that regard. And then the incident response side, that technical side, stood up really quickly. I mean, in a matter of an hour and a half, we went from everything is going to be shut down. We're pulling plugs from the wall, we're disconnecting things, this high dramatic scenario to, okay, now we need to huddle. Now we need people getting in their cars and going to the airport to do the technical support, because all of a sudden we've created what we called zombie land, which is our previous network completely shut off from the outside world. But we saw a lot of miscommunication, a lot of, staggered communication. All of a sudden we saw the things that we didn't have in place. So
even though you had been doing tabletop exercises, right?
Oh yeah, we had just finished one.
Oh, that's fortuitous.
Right. Yeah, we had just finished one, and we'd done ransomware before. But the reality is those practices, if you've done sports at all, that practice without pressure isn't very good practice, right? Yeah. When it is let's just walk through it. Oh, we would call so-and-so. Okay, how would you do that? Show me their number right now. Do you have it printed out? Do you have it on your cell phone, or do you keep it on your laptop? You have to do it right now. You need to be on the phone right now. You have to deliver.
I like that little turn of phrase, practice with pressure. I like that.
Correct.
Yeah, I do too.
It's just going through the motions if you don't. Like they say, it's perfect practice. It's not just practice. And so we know that, but that is such a hard thing to create spontaneously for an event. We did much better on this year's tabletop. In fact, our resiliency manager, AJ, did it and immediately separates people out from sitting next to their friends or their roles, immediately makes us sit apart, starts kind of rapid firing things at us. So we learned, that it was our best tabletop yet. Partly because people know what to expect. They know there's going to be high pressure, but the big deal for us was people. We needed to make sure people were safe, and we needed to make sure people could get to their destinations. And from an airline perspective, we've disconnected a lot of things. Weeks go on and we want to start reconnecting, and they're like, whoa, I don't know. Do we want to reconnect to you? Have you done what you need to do to make sure we're safe? All fair questions, but we didn't have that necessarily in our planning that they would question us. Although as soon as they did, I thought, of course you would. We hadn't thought that they would have to question it, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, you just assumed that everybody would have that volunteer spirit, but of course they're not part of the port culture, right? They're part of their airline culture.
Well, and at that point too, it's well after the whole thing has gone down, and now their question is, presumably they've been operating without the connection, and then when you're like, time to reconnect, and I can understand why they'd be like, are we sure we want to reconnect with you?
Yeah, how can I trust you again?
Yep.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the decision to refuse the ransom payment and to be transparent publicly? Because that's one of the things about this is it was a very public event.
Yep.
And was it a hard decision to make? Was it a quick decision to make? Like, what can you tell us?
So, well, really, and we didn't lead off with this, but it was a Reseda Ransomware as a group is who impacted us. That's who locked up all of our stuff. And their note was very gracious, you guys. They had done us a pen testing service and let us know that we had some vulnerabilities. And that we
great.
Could then,
that's really good information to have. And I love that it was polite too.
And the fee is completely reasonable because we've already checked your money and we know you can pay it.
Of course it was. And they had done that solid for us, and they were willing to share their report with us for just a few $1 million. They had asked for it in Bitcoin. And so I would say, was it an easy decision? For me, 1,000%. There's no way we are paying this. To the FBI, absolutely, you're not paying this. To our cyber insurance, well, we're not going to help you pay for this. But the reality is it becomes a question of we still don't know exactly what data was taken. So not only is it destruction of our operations, and our ability to function, but what data do they have and how important is that data to us? And we went through those exercises. We knew within the first 2 weeks that we were going to have to do a total rebuild of our data center. And that wasn't widely communicated, but as we're getting information on the back end, we're like, they have been in here too long for us to trust our backups, for us to trust any of these systems. So even if we pay the ransom and they give us this key to unlock everything, do we want to use it? Absolutely not. But do we want to pay it?
What could go wrong?
Exactly. They seemed very nice people.
Oh my gosh.
And so then you're explaining to executives, even if we pay for it and they give us the keys and it works, we could only use those machines as a reference.
Yeah.
We can't just stand them all back up and start using them.
Oh, everything's fine.
Exactly. So I always love the TV shows where, we got it, the ransomware, we unlocked it, we decrypted it. Super great. And then they just go about their day. We have a lot of people that wouldn't have so much angst carrying around right now if we would have just been able to do that. And so we went through the motions of those, not really the motions, but we went through those conversations. And ultimately, our executive director said, bottom line, this doesn't match who we are. This doesn't match our values that we would pay someone for these things. Now, of course, the other stuff went into that decision, that we couldn't trust it anyways. We couldn't use the systems, but it was a values-based decision. We're not going to pay, we don't negotiate with terrorists. It wasn't that dramatic, but it could be. And it was a well-received decision. And so, we did figure out what data they had, and it wasn't great. But you know what? That data is all circulating out there still, just like all of ours is, and it'll resurface whether we had paid or not. They don't just take it back.
And were there any, I think the values-based decision there, I think is a really good point, but were there any legal or regulatory components of this that were considered, who got to make this decision? Who was in the room? Everybody? Was it, I'm just curious, the structure of it.
I would say primarily, so legal team was definitely in the mix, and then the executive team. And commissioners. And so the commissioners, legal team, and all of them, the legal team had said, legally, we absolutely could pay this. We have to consider that our insurance is not going to assist with this payment. So we're out of pocket. And financially, from a good use of taxpayer dollars, which is something we talk about on the daily, is this a good use of taxpayer dollars? The answer is no. Because we're not going to be shielding the public from anything. We're not going to save. Yeah.
I wouldn't be real pleased about that as a local taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So having been impacted myself, I wouldn't have been pleased if that's where our money went, because that goes against my core values also, not just as the organization I work for. So it was a quick decision. Thank you. Well, I was going to say it wasn't a quick decision because we did our due diligence to go through all the avenues and trying to figure out if any way it benefits us and if we could make it make sense from a values perspective. And we couldn't.
Now, you said you'd done tabletop exercises that had modeled ransomware, but it sounds like maybe because it was more real, it wasn't we already know what the answer is. It sounds like there was additional analysis in the moment. Is that right?
There was. So we knew the process to follow. We knew what the flow chart looked like. Mm-hmm. But there was what we hadn't necessarily practiced is when we were going to have unknowns. At that point, when we initially started the conversation, we didn't know the volume of data that was gone, and we didn't know what was contained in that data. And then that whole what data was it was such an emotional roller coaster because it's, they took it from here. That's generally older historic stuff that's, non-sensitive. Oh, but there was a pocket here and there was a pocket here. Okay, that's not good. Oh, wait, those pockets aren't that bad. So every day was just this up and down of it's good. Yeah. So we're feeding that to the executives. And at some point I just thought, at what point do they say we have to take what the data was off the table? Because we're probably going to have to make a decision without knowing that.
Yeah.
And when I posed that, I said, we have to do this blindly. We have to make the decision whether we know or not. And I think we ended up knowing a good idea of what the data was right towards the end of the decision making process. And it didn't change, the outcome, but I think they knew how to step through the process, and they knew that there was a process. That's what's key.
Wow. That is.
They knew that we were going to have to do this, if this, then this. And again, I think people were leaning a certain way. I know I absolutely didn't have any hesitation, as didn't a few others, but luckily for the port, I'm not the final decision maker. We have other people that run through all those things, and they did a good job with that.
I just see anytime a ransom's paid, I just see it as a vote for more cyber attacks, right?
It 100% is. I forget what the number is, and honestly, I think I haven't forgotten. I've just blocked it out because it's so astronomical, the amount of money the threat actors are making year after year, and the percentage at which it is doubling, tripling, every couple of years versus what we're able to spend on it. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit, where we're putting our dollars.
There's your bridge. Actually, that was perfect.
Yes, that's a great segue to the next segment, which is okay. So now the incident's behind you, and I'm sure that every senior decision maker is then wrestling with, okay, we didn't have enough security. So how much more do we need, and where do we need it, right? So,
right.
But that may not be the right question, even though that is like maybe the knee-jerk reaction, right? We need more money, we need more tools, we need more vendors. But how do you think about it?
First of all, of course, we need more money, we need more tools, and we need more people. That's a given, right? I did a land grab straight away to make sure that we lined those things up. But the focus is different. And that's been our motto: never waste a good cyber attack, right? And build back stronger.
I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I think I mean, that is going to be the topic of the rest of this call, but I just.
But you're right, though. The focus isn't necessarily just on that. Of course, we needed all of those things but that also leads to the bigger conversation we're going to have is we need all those things because we put a lot of new shiny things out there, new technology, improvements for passengers, improvements for revenue generation. And we have to secure that, but we secure it from a initial response secure. When I'm asking executives, it's more when something new is put in place, it should be what level of disruption can we take to this new solution, to this new software, to this new whatever it is, this big shiny thing. And then what's it going to cost us in the future if this goes wrong? So that disaster recovery, business continuity planning right up front, which to be honest, when you're doing a project, you don't want to think about it failing. You don't want to think about it not being available. You want to think about how great it's going to make your life.
Happy path.
Exactly. And that makes perfect sense to me. However, what then happens is you put all your money in that up front, putting it out there, getting it installed. Then the care and feeding of it comes a little bit afterwards.
Whoa, that sounds like thinking beyond the initial implementation and the exciting part.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean I have to maintain it?
Yeah.
And the other thing that we run into is like you can't capitalize it. When you implement all of these things, you can capitalize all of that. That's a whole different other fancy accounting, right? That money for businesses that's different. The business continuity, disaster recovery, the training, the staffing for the other pieces is generally expense. And so there becomes a dollar race. Like we have to put in these new things, but in 2 years, what happens when that goes down? Have we figured out how to bring it back? Have we measured the impacts of it being gone? And then have we allotted the right number of resources and priorities to account for that? And so that's the non-exciting part of this whole approach.
And
that's the Debbie Downer approach, but you got to do it.
And I think people forget that, complexity brings its own risks, and more features, new stuff, more components, everything is that's also just one more thing to maintain, one more thing that could break, even if they're not attacked. Yeah, who's going to operate it? And I think so the question that many people ask, in a situation like this is, how much more security do we need? More budget, more tools, more vendors. But Stephanie, you've said, at least you've told Kip, that is the wrong question.
Yep.
So what's the right question?
I think to start with, the right question is, if this doesn't continue work, say it's attacked or it breaks down, how long can we be without it? What's our impact to operations and revenue without it? And from that answer, then you start figuring out where those security type dollars need to be allocated. We need a robust backup and restore plan for this system, or we need high availability, which sometimes means high availability can sometimes double the price, which is not glamorous, but you're not going to do that on something that has minimal impact, but you would do it something that has massive impact and cost implications. And with that, you start thinking, okay, how are we going to manage the life cycle? So we've just spent, I'm going to use round numbers, $1 million to implement this. When are we going to have to spend the next $1 million to keep it fresh? That life cycle planning. And again, I just want to make sure that everyone knows a lot of the things that I'm talking about, I'm not saying that the port didn't do as a whole. The more I talk to people, the more I know it's not done across the industries, because it's not exciting, it's not clear, it's not easy. But I can also say we did this really well in some areas, but as soon as this happened, we immediately knew where we had underinvested, right? So just to say, so if people are listening and say, wow, they really didn't do their job, it's complex and we did it well a lot. But in order for you to be foolproof, you have to do it 100%, which is
impossible.
Difficult. Right.
I mean, I would say it's impossible. And even and I've said this many times, and Kip has heard me say it. The law does not require perfect security, because perfect security doesn't really exist. So I think that's fine.
It's got to be reasonable.
It does have to be reasonable.
And your conversation becomes layered then. When you establish the priority on it, when you establish the importance on it, then it becomes a very layered conversation of, okay, how much can we do to prevent? All right, we can't prevent it all. How fast can we detect something? Okay, we've detected it. How fast can we recover from that? Okay, what are the downstream impacts of this being down? Because nothing gets evaluated in a bubble, because now everything touches. Even control systems that are historically more isolated, very isolated, they have other impacts, whether they're connected or not. Operationally, they have impacts. So you have to consider those. And so as you start peeling off these layers, and if you've done security, it's defense by layers. You build those. Okay, we don't want them to get into the yard. Okay, they got in the yard. We don't want them to get into the front door. Oh, they got in the front door. We don't want them to get past the entryway. All those steps. You know what those do to an implementation project? They go from something cool and shiny and new to bleh, and no one wants that.
Right.
And so it becomes more complicated. But if executives and the leaders are having the conversation of, if it's so important that we need it and we're going to spend all this money to do it, what are the impacts if we don't have it? And then are we going to put our money to maintain it and then make sure we can bring it back quickly if something happens? Because there's no foolproof. Right.
But that brings us to kind of the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which is measurement. So you had the incident. Now you're downstream of that. You've done the boring work, right? Which is what we just talked about, of trying to figure out, how are we going to keep that from happening again? How are we going to detect faster, respond faster, recover faster? Now, what do you think how should executives be measuring whether these new things are giving us the results that we expected?
Well, so important for me is asking for things like, what's our recovery time I'll go further back. Do we know where all of our critical systems are? And do we have the right staffing to respond to these critical systems if more than one or two gets compromised? Because in most cases, they staff to support the day-to-day. They don't staff to support any sort of outage or any sort of overload of that capacity, where now we're not just having to look at one system, we're having to look at 4 or 5. And so that impacts a recovery. And then you start asking, so do we have the right staff in the right places for these things? And then what's our recovery time? Are we able to put enough bodies and resources to keep that recovery time reasonable? When we are interacting with vendors, we need to know that the vendors have practiced this too. A lot of times they say, we go full SaaS now, so it's not even on us. Okay, but if they go down, it is on us. It is an impact to us. So are we asking and keeping track of, have you done the critical testing? Do you have recovery plans?
Third party risk management is a huge part of everything these days.
Yep.
And so
fourth party risk management is becoming a thing.
Oh my goodness.
If you're not aware of the Vercel, situation that recently cropped up, I won't unpack it now, but go check that out, people. Vercel.
Well, did you guys remember that period of time where the answer to the disruption is we're going to go SaaS because then there's less downtime. They can guarantee less downtime. You know what? That was a great thought for a minute. What are they doing now? What are the threat actors doing now? They're going after service providers. They're going after the SaaS solutions. So instead of hitting one airport that uses that common use system, they can now hit 36 airports that use that common use system.
We've almost done them a favor by concentrating our risk.
Well,
we are also very nice and generous people, just like they are. So we had the right idea, to give it to the experts. But then at the same time, we had to make sure that those experts are on the top of their game and that they are doing their due diligence. And that becomes, again, you see what is happening here. We're adding layer upon layer upon layer of complexity. And therein lies one of my soapboxes is we're putting all this pressure, especially right now, TSA has put all this pressure on the critical infrastructure. You have to do these things. Great. You know what? We all use the same 20 vendors. Why are you not putting pressure on the vendors? Why are you putting the pressure on us to secure terrible products? Why are you not looking at the vendors and say, if you want to be in a critical infrastructure, this is the bare minimum that you need to bring to the table?
Yep.
I don't think they should shift from us to all the software developers and all of that, but there needs to be more balance, because otherwise we're making the wrong people responsible for poor products.
Well, and you're making people responsible for something over which they have no control, and that is simply never effective nor fair.
It's
right, and I know that it's not fair, but it is what's happening, right? Yep. It's not fair, but to that point, it isn't effective. It doesn't create the change that really at the root of compliance, they're looking for that change. They want things to be more secure. We all know compliance is sometimes a checkbox, but listen, when TSA rolled out their stuff, I don't know if there was a more vocal dissenter than myself in Seattle, because we're not dumb. We knew what they were asking didn't make sense for us, but all of a sudden, every airport in the US that has to adhere to these is now one. So if it's not accepted at our airport, it's not going to be accepted at any other airport also. So we've kind of flipped that. We have to comply since the regulatory groups are not attacking the supply chain and the vendors to do that. We're doing it ourselves to say, listen, you're not going to be able to get away with that here. You're not going to be able to get away with that in LA or Oakland or Reno or Vegas or any of those locations. So you better change your stuff because, if there's only 5 of you that provide this service, which it's amazing how many niche areas there are for aviation, we'll go to someone else that is, because we all have to follow the same. But we need the regulatory bodies to do that also.
Yeah. So now you're starting to kind of get into this idea of measurements that really aren't about the technology itself, right? But you're looking at things like what percentage of our critical systems and vendors have tested recovery plans, right? And what is the recovery time for critical business functions? Not the systems, but the functions themselves.
Correct.
And I know when we were doing episode planning, you were even saying, how quickly can executives make decisions during the actual event, the incident, that we're going through? How can we set them up so that they can make better decisions, higher quality decisions, faster, all of that at the same time?
So it's one of those things where, and this legitimately comes from my childhood. We all had the conversations with our parents, don't smoke, don't do drugs, don't do these things. And I was taught, in order to be able to answer that question effectively when I'm asked, I better already know my answer. I better already know what my plan is. I better already know, those are bad examples for, what questions am I going to ask, right? So in this case, our preparation up front, you don't wait till we're in the moment for them to have heard this question for the first time. Who responds well to that? Not very many people. They're great executives at what their scope of work is, but we're throwing at them these new things. And so it's that concept of you need to be prepared for that. You need to know that this scenario can come up. You need to know what questions you're going to be asked to answer. And you're going to need to have preemptively thought through it so you can respond in the moment. Nope, just say no. I'm not going to do that. I felt like that's what we had done with the ransomware to a certain extent. No, we already know we're not going to pay a ransomware. Now, it became a little more nuanced, but I do believe if this ever happened again, it's not, you guys, this is not going to happen again. But if it were to ever happen again and that question we're asked, are we going to pay the ransomware? No, thank you. Because we've already been through it. And so the questions that they need to know, and when I say some of it is simple, executives need to know who they're supposed to call to communicate with, and they need to know who they're supposed to call for the authoritative source of information. Those are not hard things, but those are incredibly hard things in the moment for them to know who to get to, especially when you limit technology. So all of this comes down to prep before anything ever happens. We need to know the answers to these questions. And trust me when I say 2 years later, we now know what all those things are, but getting them in place is so hard. And it takes a long time. But it can be done, but it takes a lot.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So as we get to the end of the amount of time that we have available for the episode, you had mentioned kind of early on about the idea that the port said at some point, hey, we're recovered, airlines reconnect to these common systems. And they're like, I don't know, should we? There were some trust issues there, but that kind of just touches on the idea of industry collaboration, right? So not just supplier accountability, which we were talking about just a moment ago, but also about, the port probably sees its airlines as maybe partners, but then also customers. And how do you get them to participate in, the preparation for, things that could go wrong? Would you tell us a little bit about what that's like?
Sure. And this is a great timing question because on Monday we have a tabletop exercise with airlines and airport staff. And so one of the ways we do that, it is tabletop exercises, but we say to them, they are our partners, but they're also our customers. But first and foremost, we're a service provider to them. We, in some cases, we're providing equipment, but we're absolutely providing services with all of the displays and the baggage and all of those things. And so we have to have some commitments made to the people that we're providing the service to. And in an agreement like that, you say, as your service provider, we commit to doing the following things, and here's how we commit to doing them. And in return, here's what we need from you. So Monday's exercise is going to run through a couple of potential scenarios, all, fact-based, part of them, subsets of what we've already experienced, to say,
Smart.
Do you know when you're supposed to report something, and do you know who you're supposed to report it to? And then do you know who you need to direct us as your service provider to talk to? So I guarantee you that the station managers know who they're supposed to communicate to, but do the station for their local staff. But when it becomes a cyber incident, do they know who their IT staff is? Do they know who their information security staff is? Does our communication, our ACC know, like they get all the calls, whether a display doesn't work or a toilet's blacked up or whatever it is, there's a spill, they get all those. Do they know when they're supposed to call us? And why? Because we've set up these things that say, these are the things we commit to you. And then here are the things that we need you to commit to us, which is that open communication. So I will say what's been interesting to me about this whole thing is that from day one, when this happened, I said, we have to go public about this, not just because they can see that it's happening, but because we are not the only ones. And all these lessons that we're already learning from day one, we need to be putting those out there. Because what happens? Everything happens in a bubble with this stuff. If one of the airlines that's publicly traded has an incident, they can't really be that public about it, right? They have shareholders to account to. That would be irresponsible in regards. I felt like we owed it to not only our staff, but to our industry and to our partners and all of that to be as open as possible, which put a lot more scrutiny on us. But at the same time, we started hearing back what I'm hearing, which is, from airlines themselves, we didn't know we had to do that. We didn't know we had to call those people. Other airports, we wouldn't have thought of doing that for regulatory, or we didn't know that was something we should have pre-planned. To me, this becomes one of our big responsibilities being a service provider, being critical industry, critical infrastructure and a critical industry. So I think there's a lot of we should,
But I think the poster child for being transparent during recovery, for me, has often been Norsk Hydro. When they went through their ransomware attack, I think back in 2017, 2018, well, they were a publicly traded company, and they actually, because they demonstrated their resilience in such a transparent way, people actually felt more confident about them and considered them to be stronger as a result of watching them go through that. And so I hope that the port has been able to enjoy a reputation as being maybe more resilient than people thought. Do you see any evidence
I think
of that?
so. I feel like that. We have gotten a lot of kudos from places that I wouldn't have expected us to get kudos. And of course, there's been some criticism, but if I look at the criticism, I think right back at you, pot kettle black, because they know. They know. And so, but it's easy to point, but no, I think we have gotten that. But one of the reasons I've also been so public is that I wanted to make sure, and it sounds silly to me in hindsight, but in my mind, I thought I want to make sure that the port doesn't just treat this and move on as business as usual. I knew that we needed to do bigger things. We needed to be more thoughtful about some things. And I thought, if we're public about it, people are going to keep asking us about it. What have you guys done in hindsight?
That makes sense.
Are we going to do the right things? Yes. Now, in my mind, now that when I say that out loud, I think like I wasn't any sort of mastermind about it or thinking the port wouldn't do the right things. But to me, it was a checkbox. How do we make sure we could keep doing the right things and the right decisions when it's hard? We talk about it. And when you talk about it, then you're held accountable on a different level. And that's happening right now in a great way. The amount of people that are stepping up to do the right things. Now, we're having hard conversations every day. That's going to cost how much money? But we have to ask, but how much money would it cost us if we didn't do this planning?
Oh my gosh.
And they see it now. They can have that conversation in a way that makes sense.
I wish we could continue this conversation. We're out of time. We can't.
Indefinitely, but yeah, totally.
There's so much more good stuff. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. But I want to thank you for being willing to show transparency just now on this episode, being willing to come here and talk about it and share with our audience what it was like on the inside, how you thought about it, how the port thought about it. I use Sea-Tac Airport several times a year because I live in this area, and I feel better now that I've had this conversation with you.
Well, I will say, so FIFA is coming up and we're all prepping for it. And we have people asking, well, what are you guys doing extra? And all I can think in my brain is we couldn't possibly be on more high alert than we have been for the past 20 months. There is no next level for us. So the support staff, the people who did the rebuild of the technology, we have not relaxed yet. Now, are we a relaxing type of people? No, that's not our nature. But when they ask, what are you going to do more? We couldn't possibly do more, you guys. I mean, I carry 2 phones 24/7 because I don't want to be missing anything that's important.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Good for you. Any parting thoughts, Jake, before we wrap?
No, I think it's a great conversation. I think it's a conversation that can take many forms and be hours and hours long. It's a great case study. I almost wish that we could put it in a textbook and study it. Maybe someday we will, but I think it's helpful for that. And I think, episodes like this are really, really great for providing that insight into something that, look, hopefully most people don't experience this. Right. But when we have that experience out there, let's try to learn from it.
Yeah.
Even imperfectly.
Yep. Okay.
Agreed.
That wraps up this episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today, we talked about how executives should think about cyber investment after a major incident. We talked about why, how much more security do we need isn't really the right question, and what business readiness measures actually look like. We did all that with our guest, Stephanie Warren. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you.